In front of a blockbuster news report, Novita found new clues while organizing data, asking her if she considered being a model, but the green-clad person fell into the surveyor's trap. Subtitles: This is the cell. Novita promptly arranged a meeting with Detective Jim, in charge of the Leshar case. Their reason? Because they met at a victim's memorial, and Novita realized Jim was different from the others. She genuinely wanted to catch the killer. The crucial point is that to catch the killer, Jim would share clues with Novita, but it all had to be done secretly because Novita told Jim the police might be seeking DeSalle as the killer, but Jim insisted DeSalle was the Leshar case killer. Why was Jim so confident? It turns out she had already conducted an in-depth investigation of DeSalle. When the first 6 victims of the Leshar case were killed, DeSalle was serving time in prison and had no opportunity to commit the crimes. But Novita always felt things weren't that simple. Apart from that time frame, all clues seemed to point at her. Just as she was puzzled, a remark from Jenny reminded her that she had never checked DeSalle's release records. Novita swiftly used her contacts to view police records and found DeSalle sought early release in March 1962. Clearly, the judge granted her request due to her good behavior in prison, meaning DeSalle was already out 2 months before the first Leshar incident. This perfectly matched the timing of the crime, and Novita shared the new clues with Jim, but things weren't as straightforward as they seemed. Before Novita could celebrate, the next day her boss came to find her. It turned out that the imprisoned DeSalle had hired a big-name lawyer. This baffled Novita because this famous lawyer, Bailey, did not come cheap. Novita grew suspicious and contacted Detective Jim to ask about any updates on questioning DeSalle. Jim replied that she only knew DeSalle had been contacted by the lawyer, and they couldn't question her without evidence. Detective Jim even had the neighbor identify the intruder, but surprisingly, she did not recognize DeSalle. Instead, she identified a guy named George, who had been locked up for over a year for robbery and murder. While Novita was still trying to uncover the secrets between DeSalle and her lawyer, DeSalle had already confessed to being the killer. She had killed all 13 female victims. But why did DeSalle suddenly confess? What secrets lay hidden behind this? Upon hearing about DeSalle's confession, Novita found Jim again, puzzled. She wondered why the police had not filed murder charges against DeSalle since she confessed. Subtitles: To Novita's great surprise, Jim informed her that it was because DeSalle's lawyer had struck a secret deal with the police. The lawyer allowed DeSalle to confess, but the police couldn't use her testimony in court. Novita was shocked, realizing that the law enforcement didn't care for the truth. They just needed a scapegoat. In the face of this, the righteous Novita decided to uncover the truth behind it, but to her surprise, her boss stopped her. Since the police declared the case closed, the newspaper could not stand against the law enforcement agency. The newspaper only cared about news headlines, while no one cared about the deaths of those 13 innocent women or the fate of more women to come. Thus, Novita's 3-year investigation into the Boston Leshar case came to an end. Jump to 1965 in Michigan, where a man was reading at home when he heard a woman scream next door. He knocked on the door but got no response, realizing something was wrong, and called the police. At that moment, Detective Ryan happened to be patrolling nearby and quickly arrived at the scene. But when Ryan entered the house, he found the woman had already become a corpse. Since the conclusion of the Leshar case, Novita's daily life had grown increasingly mundane, until one day she unexpectedly received a phone call from Ryan. Ryan wanted to ask her, "Do you still think Albert Solf is a man?" Faced with that question, Novita fell silent, contemplating how to respond. That evening, she packed her bags, determined to head to Michigan alone. She had never truly given up seeking justice for those 13 women. The next morning, Novita found Detective Ryan and noticed in his provided material that the murders in Michigan were identical to the Boston Leshar case. But the killer, DeSalle, was still in prison. What on earth was happening? Was someone mimicking the killings? Or was the killer of the Boston Leshar case actually not DeSalle? Novita replayed the entire case from back then and combined it with recent Michigan news reports, uncovering a key clue. Daniel's ex-girlfriend was killed in Boston, and he was the prime suspect. This guy was a total creep. The coincidences were too suspicious. Ryan stated that Daniel was currently their prime suspect, but there was no evidence to charge him. Novita was the second person to report him. The other was the chief doctor of a mental institution. Novita contacted that doctor again and unexpectedly learned that Daniel was a patient at the very mental institution. She wanted Jenny to help by using her connections to find Daniel's records. Jenny soon found Daniel was in a mental hospital for attacking his GF. More importantly, he and DeSalle had stayed in the same ward for 3 months.